Have you ever noticed the kind of man who never yells, never begs, never explains himself, yet somehow controls every room he enters? He's not loud. He's not trying to prove anything. He just disappears. And when he does, people get uncomfortable. They start whispering. They check their phones. They wonder what went wrong, because his silence hits harder than any speech. That's not weakness. That's power. That's control through absence. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He believed that when a man withdraws without explanation, it's not retreat. It's a calculated move. It creates mystery. It forces others to reflect on their dependence, and suddenly they start to feel something terrifying. Not the pain of losing you, but the fear of no longer having access to you. They don't miss your love. They miss their power over you. That's the truth no one wants to admit. And if you've been the man who always picks up the phone, always responds, always explains just to keep the peace, then listen carefully. You haven't been loved. You've been used. Because in a world driven by power and perception, kindness without boundaries becomes your downfall. They don't see your loyalty. They see convenience. Machiavelli would have told you this straight. When you're always available, you're never respected. When you're always predictable, you're easy to control. You think your soft heart shows strength, but if it has no limits, it turns into weakness. And every time you say yes when you feel no, you trade your dignity for a moment of approval that is not noble. That's self-betrayal. You become background noise, the emotional butler always on standby. And the worst part, you think you're doing the right thing. Machiavelli saw this lie for what it is. He believed in scarcity, because scarcity builds value, and the man who is not scarce is not valued. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself to people who never explain themselves, don't disappear, not out of revenge, but out of discipline. Silence is not weakness. It's evolution. It's how a man rises above emotional slavery and reclaims his throne. Because when you stop explaining and start removing access, people don't ask, "Where did he go?" They wonder, what power did he discover that made him leave so quietly? If that speaks to something deep inside you, type it in the comments. I disappear to reclaim my power. And if you're done being the man who pleads for respect, if you're ready to become the man who commands it without a word, subscribe, not to chase noise, but to rise in silence. They say words are power, but Machiavelli would argue otherwise, because real power is silence. Not the silence of fear or defeat, but the silence of someone who no longer needs to explain, react, or prove anything. The silence of someone who has become untouchable. If you've ever been used, misunderstood, or pushed into a corner where your kindness was taken as weakness, this message is your awakening. Because today, you learn how to make sure no one can ever hurt you again. Not by becoming cruel, but by becoming unreadable, unshakable, and completely untouchable, just as Machiavelli would have taught. Here's what most people never tell you. Every time you react, you're giving your enemy a map of your emotions. They're studying your tone, your habits, your fears. They're watching what triggers you, what makes you chase, what makes you crumble. They don't have to overpower you. They just have to make you waste yourself. And the brutal truth is, most of us do exactly that in the name of kindness, in the name of peace. But let's be honest, it's not kindness if it costs you your power. It's not peace if it burns your soul. Machiavelli would never let that slide. He'd say, step back, stop giving your energy away for free. Let the world fight its own chaos. You stay silent, because silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. When you stop giving people your validation, when you stop rushing to explain, to prove, to calm them down, something incredible happens. You become unreadable, and the unreadable man, he becomes ungovernable. You stop reacting, and that alone makes you terrifying. They'll call you cold, selfish, distant, but Machiavelli would smirk, because now you're unpredictable. You've left the script. No one can trap what they can't understand. No one can manipulate what they can't read. You're no longer the public fountain everyone drinks from. You are the guarded fire they can only feel from a distance. And here's the key. The rarer your presence, the more power it holds. So stop fighting every battle that calls your name. Ask yourself, is this moment really worth your energy? Or are they just trying to control your reaction? If you're unsure, choose silence, not because you're scared, but because you finally stopped playing their game. Silence is the move that turns the table without touching a thing. It breaks the pattern. They expected you to beg, to argue, to cry, to explain. Instead, you disappear from their emotional chessboard, and suddenly, they're terrified. Why? Because silence reveals what noise hides. It exposes the truth. Machiavelli saw silence as a weapon, a trap wrapped in stillness. He said, "A wise man doesn't need to lie. He only needs to withhold." In a world where everyone's shouting, the man who stays silent becomes dangerous. They used to love your warmth, your helpfulness, your constant availability. Now they say you've changed, but they weren't praising your strength. They were praising your obedience. They loved the comfort of your compliance, not your character. When that compliance disappears, their illusion collapses, and they panic. They'll say your silence is arrogance, your distance is cruelty, your boundaries are betrayal. But don't flinch, because in that moment, you're watching their mask fall. Carl Jung called it the breakdown of the persona, the false identity we wear to be accepted. But Machiavelli would say, this is the beginning of the real game. Now you are not who they want you to be. You are who you choose to be, not polite, not predictable, powerful. You no longer explain, you no longer chase, you no longer speak just to smooth over their discomfort. Let them misinterpret, let them spiral, let them twist in their confusion, trying to decode your stillness. Because the greatest exposure doesn't come from fighting, it comes from withdrawal. Let that sink in. You don't owe them your words. You don't owe them your explanations. What you owe is yourself. Peace, clarity, power. And power doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It simply stands, silent and unmoved. Machiavelli understood this well. Silence is the final blow they never see coming. When you stop reacting, you don't just escape their trap, you flip it on them. They wanted drama. You gave them mystery. They wanted control. You gave them nothing. Now they panic, they overtalk, they overreach. They expose themselves. You, on the other hand, you sit back and let their own noise betray them. That's psychological warfare. That's how kings win without lifting a sword. In today's world, people are addicted to reaction. addicted to noise. They're trained to respond instantly to every insult, every text, every glance. But you're not one of them anymore. You are not ruled by emotion. You do not chase confusion. You watch. You wait. You withhold, and in that withholding you dominate, because manipulators can't function without your response. They rely on your emotions to guide their power, but when you go quiet, you break the machine. They push, nothing happens. They poke, no response. They crumble. Machiavelli wrote, "It is not always necessary to strike. Sometimes not moving at all is the most terrifying strike of all." And he was right. Your silence is not retreat. It's power under control. It's pressure. It's a vacuum that makes them reveal their hand while you show nothing. This is not weakness. This is siege warfare. They waste energy. You conserve it. They burn out. You sharpen. He who speaks first exposes himself. He who reacts loses the frame. But he who holds his silence owns the moment. Let it stretch. Let them fill the space with their own unraveling. You just listen, because in silence you reveal everything, while showing nothing. And here's another truth they don't want you to know. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your silence. You don't have to say sorry for setting boundaries. You don't need to defend your need for solitude. Every time you say, "Sorry, I didn't respond," or "I was overwhelmed," you teach people that they are entitled to your time, but they're not. Your silence is not rudeness. It's sovereignty. Your distance is not cold. It's the shape of self-respect. When you stop justifying, you take back something sacred, the right to move without permission. When they no longer expect explanations from you, they finally respect your instincts. And if they panic, that's their discomfort, not your responsibility. You're not here to be easy. You're here to be clear. Clear about who you are. Clear about what you tolerate. Clear about who gets access. Machiavelli believed it's better to be respected than loved, because love fades. Respect builds order. Too many men chase love, and they end up drained, used, forgotten. But clarity is a sword, and silence is its sheath. Wield both, and you become untouchable. So when they say you've changed, smile. Not because they're wrong, but because they're finally paying attention. You're not here to be liked. You're here to evolve, and evolution doesn't ask for permission. Let them wonder, let them guess, let them create stories in the darkness you left behind. Because any man who rises into power must first walk through the fire of being misunderstood. And if you felt this shift deep in your soul, then let it brand you. I owe no explanations for protecting my peace. And yes, it will hurt. There's a unique kind of pain that comes after you withdraw. At first it feels like peace, then comes doubt, then loneliness. You wonder if you were too harsh, too distant, too ruthless. But Machiavelli would lean in with cold wisdom. He'd tell you, power isn't born in applause. It's born in isolation, and that isolation, it's not punishment, it's purification. You're not grieving the people you left behind. You're grieving the version of yourself that needed them. The version who chased approval, who explained too much, who stayed small just to be accepted. That version is dead, and from the silence a new one rises, not polite, not predictable, but sovereign. And once you've tasted that sovereignty, there's no going back. So let them talk. Let them twist. Let them miss the old you. Because the new you isn't here to be understood. You're here to be untouchable. You're not suffering because you're alone. You're suffering because you're no longer addicted to being needed. You miss the comfort of being wanted, the warmth of being someone people expected something from. You miss the illusion that you mattered more when others relied on you. But what you really miss is the control they had over you. Because every time you said yes just to avoid a fight, you quietly whispered no to your own soul. Every time you showed up when you didn't want to, just to prove you were good, loyal, reliable, you stepped one more inch away from your own power. Machiavelli wouldn't sugarcoat this. He would call it what it truly is: a strategic death, a part of you that needed to die. The obedient part, the part that needed to be liked, needed to be accepted, needed to be seen. Because until that version of you dies, the soft, agreeable version, you'll never meet the real you. The dangerous you, the free one. So let it hurt, let it rip you apart. Let the version of yourself that begged for attention scream while it burns. Because that pain you feel, it's not weakness, it's detox. You are cleansing yourself of a lifetime of silent slavery. You're shedding the skin of the man who always waited to be told who he was. And in that space, something terrifying is being born. A man who no longer needs approval. A man who doesn't beg. A man who doesn't explain himself to those who never deserved an answer. A man who walks away and returns as a storm. Carl Jung called this individuation. When your mind becomes whole, your shadow integrated, your chaos embraced. But Machiavelli? He'd call it something colder, a power shift, not a gift, a taking. You're not being given power, you're taking it back from the people who once fed off your fear, your need to be loved, your addiction to being wanted. And it will feel strange. It will feel wrong, but so does every rebirth. Lions aren't born in the middle of applause. They're born in caves, in darkness, in solitude. And when they roar, it isn't for approval. It's because they've remembered their power. So don't. Run from the pain. Stand inside it. Let it slice through you. Let it cleanse you. Let it crown you. You didn't lose them. You lost the illusion of who they were. And in that loss, you finally found the truth of who you are. If you feel this fire rising in your soul, write this in the comments. My solitude is my sanctuary. Because here's the next truth you need to understand. There's a difference between being seen and being remembered, between being around and being respected, between being liked and being valued. Most men confuse attention with influence, but Machiavelli saw the game clearly. He wrote, "The prince who is always seen becomes ordinary." In other words, when you're always there, when people can reach you anytime, when your presence becomes predictable, you become forgettable. You used to be everywhere, always available, always replying, always proving. That didn't make you powerful. That made you convenient. But what is always available that loses its edge, what is always there, becomes invisible. You answered before they missed you. You showed up before they looked for you. You explained yourself before anyone even questioned you, and in doing so, you taught them not to value you. That ends now because scarcity creates value. Distance creates weight. You don't need to disappear. You need to become strategic. You need to be present on purpose. When you talk all the time, your words become background noise. But when you speak with purpose, every sentence becomes unforgettable. When you're always there, you're overlooked. But when you control when and how you appear, your presence becomes magnetic. Machiavelli called this calculated absence. Not to manipulate, but to build gravity. He said, let them feel your absence so they never forget what your presence costs. This isn't a game, it's power, it's protection, your energy, your time, your mind, your emotions. These are not gifts to hand out freely. They are investments, and not everyone deserves access. So from this point on, new rules. Not everyone gets a reply. Not everyone earns an explanation. Not everyone deserves your presence. If someone expects you to show up, they must be tested. If someone assumes your loyalty, they must earn it, because the more they assume, the more you must become unpredictable. That's how power works. Think of gold. What makes it valuable isn't how shiny it is. It's how rare it is, how hard it is to get, how well it's protected. So ask yourself, why should your attention be any less sacred? Why should your presence be treated like a free sample? The man who's always seen is forgotten, but the man who decides when to speak, when to disappear, and when to return, that man becomes a legend. This is not ego. This is sovereignty. This is the behavior of kings, men who don't exist for comfort, but for consequence. From now on, your attention is currency. Your presence is leverage. Your absence is a warning. So before you speak, before you show up, before you reply, ask yourself, is this person earning my presence? Or are they just expecting it because I've given it too freely? If you feel that shift, write it in the comments, my presence is earned. What you've just heard is not about being nice. It's not therapy. It's not about being liked. This is war, a psychological war, a war between who you were trained to be and who you must now become. Machiavelli never promised peace. He promised clarity. He didn't teach comfort. He taught control. He didn't value kindness without strength. He valued power, disguised as kindness, and withdrawn when kindness became a leash. And if you've been paying attention, you've just learned the first law of power. A man who does not command himself will be commanded by others. And self-command starts with one brutal decision: withdrawal. Withdrawal from pleasing everyone. Withdrawal from justifying your every move. Withdrawal from being emotionally available to those who only want to drain you. When you withdraw, you create distance, and in that distance you become unreadable, unreachable, unpredictable. That's real power. Because when you stop replying on command, people don't just wonder where you went. They start fearing what they lost. When you stop explaining your evolution, you don't just create boundaries, you build standards. The moment you stop chasing their approval, you begin building your own certainty. You stop performing. You stop apologizing. You stop shrinking to fit the version of you that made them comfortable. Machiavelli would tell you, power is not granted. It is taken, and once taken, it must be protected. Not with force, but with calculation. You are not here to be emotionally open. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are not here to be convenient. You are here to rule your own kingdom, your inner world. You decide who enters, who stays, and who never gets the key again. That's the Machiavellian man. He doesn't explain. He doesn't react. He doesn't beg to be seen. He speaks when it serves him. He vanishes when it empowers him. He returns only when the ground favors his next move. Your new life won't begin with a round of applause. It begins in silence, and it ends in mastery. Not over others, but over the one thing you were never taught to control: yourself. From this moment forward, let them gossip. Let them wonder where you went. Let them regret your absence. But you observe, you calculate, and you return only when it serves your rise. Because as Machiavelli said, power does not belong to the honest. It belongs to the prepared. And now, you are.